Mark, we're just 14 days away from Election Day. Is there time for the so-called October surprise to hit when you've already had 15 million early votes cast?
Sure. I mean, it wouldn't affect those already cast, but there's still plenty of votes hanging in the balance that'll determine the outcome. I do think this cycle, the bar for an October surprise to impact the race is quite high. We've already had attempted assassinations, the change of candidates at the top of the ticket, a lot of other pretty high voltage events. I think the public is somewhat inured. So an announcement of an indictment of one of the candidates, something like that, which in previous cycles would have been an explosion, I think may not really affect the outcome. But as I said, the bar is high. Pretty much everything Martian invasion and above.
Yeah, I know we joke, but we've seen just about everything you can at this point. What is there left to uncover? One has been in office for the past 4 years. The other has served as president already. Obviously, you've seen both of them campaign here, and you've seen 2 assassination attempts on one, and indictment after indictment. Let's get to polling if we can, at least to try to make sense of where you are 2 weeks away from Election Day. New polling showing former President Trump has momentum over Vice President Harris, and Trump is the present favorite to win. This in the national interest polling there are posting that. But the Atlas Intel poll shows Trump leading Harris 50-47, and then Trump is leading in 3 of the 4 most recent polls that we see here. Reuters, Rasmussen, Tip, Beacon, Shaw. Now Harris again up, even as right now up 3 points over Trump. But interesting point, Chris, just looking at the stance of the race right now, do you expect any polling to ever show for the next 2 weeks outside of the margin of error?
Well, it depends on how the polling is done. As a pollster, I won't be critical of others here, but I will say that I do think that most of those public polls are undersampling low turnout, low propensity voters. They're looking at people who voted in 2020 or even 2016, and I think that is the flaw in them, because I will tell you, when I look at those low propensity voters, those who either are new registrants or even those who have not voted as frequently in the past, I'm seeing Trump win those almost 2-1, like in the mid to low 60s. So I think that is what is not reflected in a lot of the public polling. And what I'm seeing in the polling that we're doing in states from as diverse as California to Texas to Florida, and it's to Ohio, that I've just seen in the last week, where those numbers are starting to add up to those lower propensity voters, and I think they're the ones who are going to make the big difference. And frankly, it's what makes his event this weekend, talking about stage events at McDonald's, so smart, because that is an appeal to those types of voters.
Yeah, Mark, when you're talking, about the Harris campaign or even the Biden campaign, when they're looking at these polls, how are they feeling?
I mean, if they're looking at their private polls, the Trump campaign is as confident as I've ever seen Donald Trump's campaigns in his 3 runs for presidency. There are people talking about winning all 7 battleground states now in Trump world. The Democrats publicly have acknowledged that they're behind in some of the battleground state polls, and at best even in others. And you're starting to hear from some independent analysts that if the early vote numbers, the way they are now, stand, by the time we get to Election Day, there won't be any mystery about who's going to win. So they're focusing at this point, I think, less on the polls and more on the early vote data, which is unforgiving for them in almost every state where we can sense the trend. If the trend currently is such that, as I said, it would be impossible for Democrats to win on Election Day.
And just to point out really quickly for the viewers right now, so early voting with Republicans having a bit of a surge there, combined with day of, you're saying that if this stays on that track, that this would be over for in favor of Trump, Mark?
Yeah, Democrats cannot make up, Republicans, if they go into Election Day with a much smaller deficit than they had 4 years ago, they will swamp the Democrats on Election Day with Election Day vote. So Democrats will know, if the margins are anything like they are currently, will know that Trump's going to win on Election Day.
Wow, wouldn't it?
Information. Truth is freedom. Is Newsmax. It's real news for real people.